thank you again to Marietta, to Leslie, to Svetlana and Leigh for joining us today. We're excited to dive in and explore a little bit more about your experience with you. So to begin with, I am going to start with Marietta at the very beginning. Looking back to the start of your career, could you just share with us how did you enter the nonprofit sector? What was the beginning of your journey?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. The beginning of my journey was as an artist myself. I was a musician and a dancer. And when I came to the United States, I was actually teaching music and then performing. And as a performer, I saw all the problems that other musicians had, getting paid, getting recognized, trying to make a living with their art. So it became my mission to help musicians actually make a living and perform and have a career in music. And that was a purpose that I developed. So I knew that the best way to channel that was through philanthropy, to partner with an organization in which that was their purpose already, and through a shared purpose, effect that helped to artists. Then I found an organization myself. When I saw that organizations that were in existence, I was in the Washington, D.C. area at the time, were not doing enough for the artist community. I found my own organization called the Latin American Folk Institute. And through that, I was able to not only help musicians in their career by getting them performance opportunities, but also providing teaching opportunities for them during the day and then performing at night so they could actually make a living. So for me, philanthropy is about looking outside yourself. It's about long-term shared purpose. And that's what I always say, there is a difference between philanthropy and charity, because charity has the tendency to be, it's a response to a need, to a crisis, to something immediate. But a philanthropy is a sustained long-term effort, and it's shared purpose between the donor and the organization and the community. So I entered the field with the purpose that I had, and then shared that purpose through an institution that I created.
Thank you. Those words are often used interchangeably, and that's such an important distinction between charity and philanthropy. Yes. Marietta, we know how much you've done for the Afro Latin Jazz Alliance and have grown numbers significantly and really created a foundation of philanthropic support. I have to ask you, do you still dance and perform? I know we didn't script this part.
I don't dance anymore, but I do perform.
Okay.
I play guitar, and I've been playing with a guitar quartet. And during the pandemic, we did some online performance. And right now I'm in the process of convincing the rest of the quartet to put time to record. So we are trying to record like 3 or 4 songs to put out there first in YouTube, and then to actually have a piece, an album or something. But these days about streaming music, so you don't need to print it. So that's what where we're at.
A well-rounded career. Thank you, Marietta. Svetlana, if I could turn to you for a moment. You've been at Catalyst and in the nonprofit sector for a long time, Catalyst specifically for 2 decades. Could you talk a little bit about how you've seen the nonprofit industry evolve over the course of your career?
Sure. And hi, everyone. So I think it's evolved a great deal in the 23 years since I started in the space. Millennials now make up the largest share of the workforce, and I see many young people being attracted to nonprofits because they believe nonprofits have the opportunity to make a difference on some of the big challenges that we see in the world and be quite innovative in their approaches. And I don't think that was the case when I entered the sector. Advancement in technology has a lot to do with this, but also the skills and ideas that employees are bringing to the industry, I think, are much more diverse. As are the approaches around raising money, right? There's so many more ways to engage with donors today than there was 23 years ago. And along with this, there's been, a greater push around transparency. It's so important that people and institutions trust you to use their money. Enormous wealth that's been accumulated over this period, over the 23 years. So, think Silicon Valley, and you have the giving approaches of someone like Mackenzie Scott, whose pace of giving is so astounding, and the support comes with very few strings attached. So it'll be interesting to see the impact of these donations in the coming years, and if others with vast wealth, get inspired by her approach.
That's good. You just hit on both ends of the spectrum. The ultra high net worth individuals are giving more, and the digital strategy at the lower end has evolved dramatically over the course of your career. Leigh, thinking about fundraising strategy and all of the experience that you've had at CCS, could you talk a little bit about the approach to women philanthropists and how we might advise our clients to think about approaching women versus a couple versus just the man? What do you think about when you advise clients?
Yeah, absolutely. And hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Caroline, I love this question. I think, I'll first say that the approach to this type of question, right? Like every household is unique. And I think in the same manner that we know fundraising strategies for different organizations can't be a one size fits all approach. There's fundamentals that ring true across the board, but we have to be tailored in our approach. I think there's maybe an unfortunate, but hopefully an eroding assumption that the man in the house makes all the giving decisions. And we've seen data to change that, or data that disproves that. And so we know the dynamic is really changing. And Svetlana just touched on this a little bit. We've seen billions of dollars given away from prominent women philanthropists. In the past 10 months, we've seen such a tremendous increase. And the field is changing a lot. So when we think about advising our clients to approaching a couple or approaching the women of the household, I think first and foremost is don't make any assumptions and be really transparent. Ask your donors, engage them in the decision-making process. So know who's going to be involved in these conversations, and help donors, whether it's a couple together or if it's the woman of the household, help them understand what they need in order to make their decision. So being thoughtful, being strategic, being intentional. And I think about a couple of the clients that we are currently working with. So we recently put together a proposal for a donor at a client for $250,000 with a naming opportunity. And the donor was a woman, loved the proposal, liked the naming opportunity, but came back to the client to say, can you include my husband in this, please, as well? Easy fix, right? We wanted to make sure that the renderings for the naming opportunity had both names on it. Easy fix, but it made a huge difference. And I think we got confirmation last night that this gift, in fact, did win. Congratulations.
Yes.
But it's about being really thoughtful and intentional and engaging people in the conversation with you. Thinking about who you're addressing in a solicitation, in an invitation to an event. Working with another client right now, right? The donor insisted that his wife be part of the feasibility study interview with them. They wanted to be involved in it at the same time. Just being thoughtful about that. For another client, I think about a feasibility study that we're doing. The husband and wife actually wanted to be interviewed separately. Really interestingly enough, when we presented the case and asked about perhaps their giving indication or what they thought they might participate, the wife gave a very specific indication. Separately, the husband was a lot vaguer, but then asked what his wife had agreed to, and we had her permission to share. And he said, yeah, absolutely, that's right. What she said, and hopefully even more. And then thinking about naming opportunities, whose name comes first, right? When you're putting a rendering in front of people. We're working with Weill Cornell, and it's named by Sandy and Joan Weil, but everywhere you see that name, Joan's name comes first. And that's really intentional as part of the strategy that Wealth Cornell uses when approaching them for additional gifts. So I think our clients are successful when they're thoughtful, the couple or both people are involved in the conversation and asked about preferences and really, really intentional. Don't make assumptions and just be really strategic about approach to the donors that we're currently working with.
Leigh, so if I'm hearing you, the takeaway really is inclusivity. It doesn't hurt to err on the side of always being inclusive, because that way, they could steer you one direction or the other. And I know from, our work together, there are many couples that have hard and fast rules around their philanthropy that they have agreed upon as a couple, that, whether it's a 50-50 split or a 50-80, or they make decisions together or separately, they have an understanding and a firm rule about how they do it. So we wouldn't know that off the bat, but by being inclusive, we have the opportunity to allow them to steer us towards what works for them.
Absolutely.
Leslie, you've worn many, many hats over the course of your career, not just at Bideawee, but prior. If you take a long look back, is there a person that stands out to you that has impacted you most throughout your career?
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, first of all, for putting this together. This is great. I think it's so important for women to talk about women in our careers and the industries that we're working in. So thank you for that. And the question is actually has a threefold answer to me. If I think truly about who's impacted me the most, first of all, I'm lucky enough and honored to be leading an organization that was founded by a woman in 1903 before she had the right to vote. So, against all odds, she kept an animal welfare organization alive on private donations through, human tragedies and World War I, World War II, the flu pandemic, the Great Depression. And back when a time when animals weren't looked at as family members as much as they were, they are today. And to be able to keep this mission alive for 118 years is so inspiring to me. It teaches me never give up against any odds that you face. That she faced so many, and still today we honor her mission. So I'm grateful for her, and really I think about her almost every day in my daily existence as the head of this organization. Also, I had a very special mentor who helped me through my career, who was a woman, not a woman from the nonprofit industry, but a woman in business who just knew exactly how to work with someone to guide them through their career. What do you want? Where do you want to be? Who do you want to be? Essentially, who do you want to be when you grow up? And, here are some things to get you there, and has been with me for years and still is with me to this day. I use her as a sounding board. And then lastly, truly any of us in nonprofit, the staff, on the boots on the ground, they are most impactful to me on a daily basis, because you will see that typically it's the ones who make the least in an organization who have the most passion and dedication. And I take that with me every single day, and I take it very seriously. It impacts me in the work I do on a daily basis.
Thanks, Leslie. Thinking about mentors, those of us that have one are so fortunate to have learned over the years from somebody else that blazed the trail a little bit before us. And I didn't know that about the founder of Bideawee. That's so neat. Great story. I just want to make, Jen, thank you so much for making a comment in the chat. As it refers back to the question that I posed to Leigh about, gender roles and decision-making in philanthropy, certainly not to leave out same-sex partnerships or marriages when there are two men or two women. That rule of sort of inclusivity or guidance would certainly remain, and to be mindful of all of the same-sex couples that we might approach for gifts. Inclusivity 100% across the board. Thank you for that, Jen. Marietta, moving back to you for a moment, could you comment on gender roles and any, challenges you faced throughout your career, or other challenges, if appropriate, just the things that stand out to you as you think back over the evolution of your own career.
Let me see. Oh, I'm not muted, right?
No, you're good.
Challenges. Well, being a woman and a Black woman and a Latina woman, I would say that's a triple whammy in the industry. At different time for different purposes. I think although in the arts industry, most of nonprofits are led by women, we still face a lot of discrimination, because with that it comes the assumption that you are you don't know what you're doing, or you don't deserve a lot of attention, respect, etc. But the most thing that I have found is first discriminated as a woman, and then specifically as a Latina woman, as an immigrant. When I started leading the organization, it was very difficult to fundraise, because people don't take you seriously, or they only want you to fundraise with people like you. So I always heard this like, oh, why don't you just go to the Latin community? Basically, that's the only people who are going to give you money, because you cannot possibly make a bigger ask or a bigger statement to a larger society. But then leading the organization, I also found discrimination as a leader internally with your board. The boards at the time when I started were composed mostly by men. Even in the arts industry, although a lot of leaders were women, a lot of boards, and I think to this day that you see a lot of the board, the majority are men. So you were constantly asked to prove yourself. The board, I remember that I have to ask so many questions from a board. They challenge all your statements. They challenge all your finances. Every time I would present a financial statement, they would, basically, I thought that I was in college. They will ask you to explain it, but not because they didn't understand. At the beginning, I thought, oh, they don't understand it, let me explain it. But then I realized that no, they're testing you to see if you know what you're doing. So that was, actually, my response to that was, it was encouraging, because then I found my voice. Then I said, okay, this is what you're doing. I'm going to talk to you as a teacher. Basically, I'm going to treat you as a student, and I'm going to talk down to you the same way you're trying to talk down to me. And that worked, at least with boards. To this day, I am trying to be very assertive with those kind of audiences. And my fundraising have gone very well, thanks to, again, some mentors. But I still face a lot of discrimination these days. It's mostly about being foreign, more than about being a woman. It's more about being a Black foreign woman. Who are you? What are you talking to us? And again, I don't take it personally ever, because this is something we all have to learn, that every time you're discriminated, you have to see that the deficiency is with the people discriminated against you, not with you. So it is my job, and I believe our job, to educate those people about the importance of inclusivity. These days, a lot of funders locally are recognizing how important diversity is, how important different kinds of thoughts and being more inclusive is for the health of all organizations. So I think things are getting better now, but I still experience it in my every single day life as a leader of a arts organization, even in New York.
Yeah, that's a great lesson, Marietta. In the face of being tested or discrimination, to flip it on its head and be the teacher in the moment, or the experience, or the career. That's a great lesson for all of us. And
because if you think about it, they discriminate because they don't know better.
Right.
They are not being exposed to different voices. They are not being exposed to different thoughts. So if you think about that, then you are not, intimidated by it, but encouraged by it. Okay, this is a teaching moment.
Well, I can affirm that you have certainly learned to be assertive. Afro Latin Jazz is lucky to have your assertion.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Marietta. Thanks for sharing that. Svetlana, just circling back to you. We've talked so much about breaking the glass ceiling over the last decade more. My question would be, how do we break the glass ceiling, and maybe have we already broken it?
Okay, I see.
So it's an interesting time right now, because I think we're dealing with a confluence of factors, just building on what Marietta was talking about. In the last few years, and certainly because of the pandemic and racial justice movements, I've seen diversity, equity, and inclusion starting to make its way front and center to the nonprofit sector. We still have a long way to go, but I see leaders being more thoughtful about senior leadership composition and around workplace policies, and these are important steps to take. We also know that salary range laws are crucial for everyone, but particularly important for women. New York just passed the wage transparency law, and that means that people don't need to negotiate in the dark anymore. So think about what this means for women now. And it's important for more states to adopt this. Right now, we're also dealing with a big talent shortage, and that's affecting nonprofits as well. Employees are in a position to be really selective about the kinds of organizations they join, and a competitive salary is critical. At Catalyst, we're about to do yet another salary analysis to see how we compare to others in our space. But in general, I don't think that the steps are that different from what we've been pushing for at Catalyst. We work with corporations, and we've been pushing for years, commit to the gender pay parity by role, focus on creating inclusive workplaces where, all voices are heard, whether, function, role, tasks, and that, you're not subjecting people to stereotyping. Ensure that women and women of color in particular have sponsors who are going to champion them into their next opportunity, and give women the right kind of feedback. Women consistently receive less feedback tied to business outcomes, and people just don't understand how much vague feedback holds women back, especially women of color.
You just touched on a lot. We could probably talk all day.
I know, it's
about
yes.
each of those topics.
Yes.
But yeah, a great snapshot of some of the main issues, and I think you hit the nail on the head. We still have a long way to go with each of these. Leslie, circling back to you, so a two-part question. You talked about your mentor earlier. What advice, maybe from your mentor or outside of that, was given to you that still to this day stands out to you? And then carrying that forward, what advice would you give to the next generation of women philanthropists and women leaders?
It's so interesting that Svetlana ended on the feedback portion, because I think the feedback is so important, and advice is important as well. And having my mentor sort of work with me from an early time at Bideawee to say, where do you see yourself going? She was a board member. She was not in the nonprofit space. She was in the corporate space, but understood, looking at somebody, a young woman who was looking for leadership, or I wasn't, because I wasn't that young, but saying, where do you see yourself? I explained to her that what I wanted at some point was to head up an animal welfare organization, a nonprofit organization. And that was my goal. And she said, okay, here's my advice. And this advice I've held on to from that time forward for anything I think that I would go into, which is, you need to go to your CEO or another CEO, say, what are my skill gaps? If I wanted to be you someday, I don't want to be you today. I don't want to, you don't want to threaten that person, but you go to the person whose role that you at some point want to be in and ask, do you know my work? Do you, if this person knows your work and is familiar with your career, ask them where your skill gaps are. And when they respond, take that as a really important sign as I need to go and find, ways in which to educate myself. Ask your mentor, go back to your mentor and say, these are my skill gaps. These are the places, the holes that I need to plug into so that when I get to that point, I have more well-rounded background in order to fill in, a role like a CEO. Say it's, you want to be the CEO of a nonprofit organization. What are you missing? Are you missing something on HR law or, finance? Is that where your background isn't strong enough? My career was, in fundraising. And I, like so many people, I think my age and so many women my age came into it sort of by accident. We fell into it and we grew in the roles. We didn't go, there was no nonprofit, graduate degrees back when I was going to school. So there was nothing that you could really educate yourself except for learning on the job. And so being able to fill in those skill gaps before I got to the role was so important when I finally got into that role and helped me actually get the job. That being said, the advice that I would give to, the next generation of nonprofit leaders, of women, in any career would be find yourself that mentor, find yourself somebody who's been there, who can help you along the way. It's so nice to be able to talk to somebody about this, especially somebody outside of your organization sometimes when you really feel you can be free to speak with them and ask advice, that you might not feel free to ask advice of your own boss or someone along those lines. But find that mentor. And then someday when you get to that role, be that mentor. Find somebody you see them in your own organization. You see these young women who are coming up who show leadership right away. You can spot them, take them aside, say, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's so important. It was so important in my career. It really was, I think, the number one reason why I'm in the role I'm in today, because of the advice of that one person.
It's pretty powerful. Yeah. On mentorship, before I turn to you, Leigh, I will just say, as you were speaking, Leslie, I've had the privilege of watching Leigh's career and come in early on. I think she was at CCS. I rehired her several years ago, and I'm sure you had I think you probably had a mentor. Leigh, I won't speak for you, but now watching Leigh mentor so many young women at CCS who are so grateful for that. It's been inspiring to watch. Certainly the role of mentors, I hear it every day, how grateful people are to have that advice within the organization or outside. Yeah. Our last question before we turn to open it up for questions. So please, for those of you on the line, if you've got anything you've got in mind, if you wouldn't mind taking some time to put it in the chat, that would be terrific. I'm gonna ask this of Leigh, but certainly ask all of our panelists to weigh in on it as well. As we think about both giving interests of women, so what are the organizations they're giving to, what are the causes they're giving to, as well as their practices and their behaviors, how are they giving, what are their motivations, that kind of thing. Have you seen over the course of your career a gender differential? Differences in practices, differences in interests and behaviors?
Absolutely. I just want to, before we do that, I just want to comment quickly on Leslie's point. One of the really big takeaways there, and it's so interesting, is it's so important, and this goes back to what Svetlana had said as well about feedback. I think it's so critical to recognize where you can grow. You have to focus both on strengths, right? I think there's like a big mentality that you should only focus on your strengths, right? Find what you're good at and grow those, and surround yourself with people that can help elevate maybe some of the areas where you need some additional support. but it's really hard and it's really important to understand where you can grow and where those weaknesses are. It's hard to like admit that there are weaknesses or that there are opportunities for growth. But I think it's so important to be able to recognize and to really see that. And so I value that from your perspective of taking the time to do an inventory of yourself and say, where do I need to grow? And then taking the time to ask somebody else to do that inventory and say, where are the areas that I really need to grow, and then work hard to improve them. So I just want to recognize that, because I think there's this whole conversation around just focusing on what you're really good at. And I think that's incredibly valuable, but I'd be remiss if we didn't just focus on some of those other areas to improve as well. So just quickly, I think we have some of this information on slides as we think about trends and giving practices. Just looking at gender matters. Sorry, Amanda, if we go back to a couple of slides, like there's some thought around, or the data on demographics and motivations. And the thing that sticks out the most for me here is the outcomes. And I would love to hear from others on this call as well. But if you just look at the bottom here, we talk about the difference that giving makes for men and women. Men or single men see the greatest increase in their life satisfaction when they become donors, and women see that satisfaction when they increase their giving. So it's not necessarily just that first gift and how they're giving, it's the exponential impact or the leveraged impact that they make on an organization. And I just find that to be so fascinating, right? There's a lot more information here about women giving based on empathy, and we see that in our conversation with donors. And women, the large collective that they become part of giving circles as well, how much more likely they are to donate to, of course, women and girls causes, arts and education. But as we think about motivations and satisfaction that we see with women donors, thinking about increasing their giving and the importance that puts on organizations, development professionals, and leadership to really cultivate those relationships so that you can go back and ask about increased giving. So there's a lot to unpack here. Marietta, I just saw that you unmuted. I don't know if you want to say something, but by all means.
Yes, I have seen in our industry, I have seen an increase in younger women participating. And participating differently than older women. Older women, at least in our industry, tended to give more to a specific causes like education, children, animal rights, things that they identify with. And with younger women, I have seen that they support more organizations that have a broader impact. So they are definitely thinking about their impact in a larger things rather than in a project base. Another thing that I have seen, if women versus men, women tending to give more, I would say that long term, like a multi-year, like they give a little bit, but every time or every month. For example, I have a donor who prefers to give, I give you this much every month or every year, instead of like, I'm gonna give you this amount and I'm done with that. So it's about then having the involvement with the organization, really being a participant. I have seen also an increasing volunteer among women, voluntarism. So that again increases participation. But the biggest shift that I have seen is that of younger women now who are mid-career, now who are entering the corporate world, and they are mid-career, they are thinking about joining boards, giving more money, giving on a steady basis. Even at the board level, we just got 2 young women who this is the first time serving, and they wanted to do that. They want to be involved. They want to have an impact. So that's the biggest thing I have seen. I think I've not seen what I would like to see, which is more diversity on the giving. And I believe that, again, that philanthropy is a culture. And we hear that a lot of people don't have the culture of philanthropy. They still think about, oh, I'm going to help you, instead of like, I want to participate in a cause that is dear to me. Again, that thing about philanthropy versus charity. They will give you if there is a disaster, but they are not involved. So I want to see that different. I haven't seen it yet, but I see a younger generation now of women getting more involved.
Yeah. The comment you made, Marietta, about women, whether it's a membership and they're giving monthly or annually and being connected to the organization, tying that back to, we don't need to put the slide up, but there was a statistic on the slide about 70% of people in giving societies are women. That's an astounding number to me. And it speaks to the fact that women like to be part of something. It's a tie to the organization. There's even tiers in societies. So women can go from one level to, I mean, anybody can, but to the next, to the next. But based on the fact that most of the people who join these are women, there's a real sisterhood that, is tied to that and a connection with the organization. So as we think about, how we approach women, these statistics and this data is really informative to understand what is motivating young women or women of all ages, really.
If I could just for a second also say that we need to think about the fact that so many of our donors, I know in animal welfare and the arts, are women, that we need to make sure when we are soliciting donations, whether it's through the web, whether it's through direct mail, whether it's through, one-to-one solicitation, remember who your audience is, remember who you're speaking to. And the majority of them, really are women out there who are making the decision for a household, as far as the donations are concerned. Mm-hmm. And it's so important in how we communicate to make sure, because it's not just communicating, it's who's on the other end listening and making sure that we're reaching women where, with voices that they want to hear.
And that exactly what you said, Leslie, is also communicating in a way that is not transactional, because women do not respond to that. I have seen it like, this is a transaction like men do. For women, it is not that, it is a participatory process. And we need to recognize that when we reach out to women for a donation, to make them part of it.
And relationship based, for sure.
Yeah. And if I can jump on that, the transactional piece, I was sharing with the CCS team that when Catalyst launched its Major Gifts campaign, and we went to our board has a lot of, it's primarily CEOs of very large multinational organization. And that, we encouraged competition, right, in terms of securing gifts. So we gave we kind of put that competitive spirit into the air, and the men responded really well to it. And so I was reading some articles, and it was just food for thought that it reinforced that women you can't necessarily rally women in the same way that you rally men to give, but that, many organizations rely on this method. And so as Catalyst gets into individual giving, it was something, for me to consider. It doesn't necessarily mean that, we need a very delicate approach, for women, but, that it does require a different approach, around cultivation.
If I could just add one piece that's so interesting, that I don't know if this is in the slides that we had shared or if this is a different report, just thinking about the role that women play, not only in current philanthropic decision-making, but in the education of other family members. So thinking about their children, right? And how their children will look up to them in terms of how they make their decisions, where they're giving, how they're giving, the thought process through that. And I think this, maybe it isn't fair that women are slated to inherit 70% of this, the great wealth transfer. And so just thinking about how they are involved in that conversation and what the amplification of that will be is really important, right? So
did you say 7%, Leigh?
70%.
70%. That's a very
70%
statistic. Okay.
Yeah. So thinking about that, and then thinking about the family dynamics and how people are looking to their parents, their aunts, whatever role the women play in that family, grandparents or grandmothers, to help them learn their own future philanthropic giving is so critical.
And Leigh, one more thing, if I will add, even not only at the family level, even at the institutional level, foundations that are led by women give differently. For example, a foundation and I'm not gonna give name now, that led by men, when they ask you to compare how their gift compared to other gifts. So it's again that competition thing. And a foundation led by a woman wants to see what impact her gift is doing. So you see the complete different approach, large foundations, one led by men, one led by women.
That's good, Marietta. Thank you all. There's a couple questions in the chat that I wanted to get to. And this is for all of our panelists, and if there are other thoughts from people on the line, please feel free. The first is from Andrea. Hi, Andrea. Her question is, what is the best strength about a woman that leads? So for our panelists, as you think about either strengths you see within yourselves that really work, or other women leaders of other organizations you've been exposed to, things that stand out to you, that you admire, that you see working. If you could comment on a characteristic or maybe a few characteristics of women leaders.
I'd like to just approach this from, the Catalyst research side, because we've done a lot of research around, women, leadership, men, comparing the two, what gets women ahead, what gets men ahead. So one of the studies that we did some years ago, we followed women and men over a period of time. And what we actually found is that, we hear a lot about the queen bee syndrome, and that women don't necessarily help other women. And yes, we all may have random, experiences, but what the data actually showed is women, to a much larger extent, are pulling other women along, more so than men are. So, women are acting as mentors, women are sponsoring other women, advocating for other women. So, that to me is very powerful, that, bring other women along, as you climb, bring other women along. I think the key is to, not bring those who look like you, right? Because we want that diversity of thought. We want, better outcomes. So I just wanted to, speak about dispelling that myth that, women do not help other women, because it's just not true.
Agree 100%. They did a study, Svetlana, interestingly enough, about why in adverse conditions more women finish marathons than men do. And, a lot of it is because they don't try and finish to win necessarily. They're finishing and they're helping others along in adverse, like super cold, super rainy. Men will just give up because they're like, I can't win in this adverse condition. When they're like, no, come on, let's get through this together. And they'll pull others along. It's really interesting study to show, like, that's how, the difference in thinking. But I would say that something that I have done some reading about and sort of paid attention to, throughout my career is sort of the EQ, the emotional quotient or emotional intelligence, and being a woman leader, being able to utilize that in managing people. So important to make sure you're paying attention, especially managing through a pandemic too, because now you have people who, are going through stressful situations, the one of which none of us have ever been through, right? And getting people through that, getting people and lifting people up throughout that time, making sure that we're all taking care of, our staff, our teams, volunteers, and so that we can continue to do and fulfill our mission. I think one of the most important qualities that I relied upon was that EQ or emotional intelligence, so that it could help me help others through it.
That probably has never been more important than the last few years. Always important, but as we think about Black Lives Matter, as we think about this pandemic, certainly, and all the, what's going on in the Ukraine now, how people are impacted by all of these things happening in the world. And work is work, but, we're dealing with human beings that we need to approach as a whole person. And that emotional intelligence, I've seen it sort of on steroids throughout the past couple of years. Thanks, Leslie. If I could just get to one or two more questions. in the chat. Great question. From Ramona, what should you look for when identifying a mentor? So if there's somebody in a scenario right now where they don't really have that person to go to, and thinking about, the value of having that person, what makes a good mentor? What should somebody be looking for?
So I'll answer this, but I think first of all, you have to identify someone that you look up to. It could be somebody, that you worked with. It could be, somebody on your board. It could be somebody that from outside your workplace who that their career, as long as it's somebody that you've sort of seen some example of the way that they value, work, humans, people, and that you can approach them and say, look, I'd love to talk to you about my career. It starts to me as a conversation about that first. I'd love to talk to you about my career, get some advice, see how they respond to that. Do they respond in a way that sort of leads to more conversation back and forth, where you could then say, hey, I'd love, to talk to you more frequently, would you have time on a once a month or, once every other month for me to buy you coffee or, have a phone call. I think it's a little bit of finding that right it's almost like dating, right? in the beginning, because you kind of have to have coffee first. Don't go on for dinner, but have coffee, chat a little bit, see if that person is not just somebody who you respect their career, but if they can give you some advice that really resonates, then start the conversation and go from there. I mean, it can happen naturally. It happened naturally with my mentor. There's actually somebody new on my board that I really am fascinated with his career and advice that he has and the way he looks at problems. A lot of it too is the way somebody looks at a problem, and see, because they can help you sort of look at problems and how to decipher something in a new way you might not have thought. And so, I've gone to him and said, look, I'd love to pick your brain, on a more regular basis. And he's happy to. They have to be willing to as well. So always asking.
Thank you. There's one other question that intrigues me a bit. As women leaders, we often are very independent, assertive, as you commented on, Marietta, often find solutions within ourselves, have all the answers. I'll speak for myself, maybe. But as we look to, our male colleagues being part of the solution to some of the challenges that women still face, Caitlin's asking, what can we ask from our male colleagues in supporting women leaders? I want to have thought on addressing that question.
I can go ahead. I mean, there's so much here. I think, just going back to what I had mentioned earlier, I think, if you are a male leader, it's, how do you give feedback, right? So we know that men tend to get the kind of feedback that propels their careers. It's focused on business outcomes. There's so much bias embedded in feedback. A woman can't handle, direct feedback. She's going to break down and cry. But it's so critical. And then the other aspect is also just, evaluating performance fairly, right? So we know that men are more often promoted on their potential than women are. Women are promoted on performance. So, what a woman has to do to prove that she's worthy of, the next step into leadership is so much more than a man. So I would just say, there's a lot of things, but, if we can start with feedback that's unbiased and performance reviews that are unbiased, where you're assessing talent equitably, across gender, across race, ethnicity, it's really important.
I will add to that communication styles,
Mhm.
because men communicate in such a way that it's, again, they talk about their potential like it is something given. And women talk about their potential using the word I try. I actually coach a lot of people eliminating the word try from their vocabulary. Don't try, do. Because men don't say, I'm going to try to be there. No, I'll be there or I won't be there. And that is a different communication that I think working with a male colleague, you could talk about that and learn from them those styles of communication that tend to get better responses from whatever audience, both men and women. I have seen it time and again, and I have a lot of women who still, I actually coach women to change that language of insecurity, of being vague about, just be clear about what you want and don't be afraid. The worst thing that happen, they say no. You could survive, that,
Thanks, Marietta.
Mhm.
There's one thing I would add to this one that, if I may, that I've been an advocate for at CCS for a long time, and that is just sort of the work-life balance and the shifting in culture of what a workday is, and being supportive of that. And to give an example, years ago, I said to one of our leaders at CCS, I just wanted my cards on the table because I didn't want to feel like I was tiptoeing around. And I said, if you call me at 1 p.m. and you hear, 33-year-olds in the background and I'm at school, please trust that that's where I need to be in that moment. Rest assured, I'm probably going to be working till 2 o'clock in the morning that night because I had to fit in a parent-teacher conference or I had to do something at the school. But it's not your 8 to 6 day. It is sort of a 24-hour operation. And this speaks more to motherhood, but just the role of a woman and the many hats that we do wear. That this isn't, getting on a 7 a.m. bus, going in and forgetting about the family for the day and coming home to a meal cooked on the table at the end of the day. It's doing all of those things throughout the course of the day. And that would be something I think still has a lot of room for understanding and improvement in that flexibility. That brings us to 12:01, and I really do want to be mindful of all of your very busy schedules. I just want to take, a moment to thank our panelists so much. I think I can speak for Leigh and myself to say, Marietta, Leslie, Svetlana, we are so privileged to work with you. You are such inspiring women leaders. This has been a joy to dive into this a bit with you. So thank you for making the time for this. Thanks all to all of you who tuned into this. We did have it recorded and we'll disseminate it across other channels. And if you have questions still in the chat that we didn't get to, apologies, but we will write to you independently to address those. So thank you, everybody, so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.